Welcome back. In this particular video, we will be talking about attributes. Okay, so already regarding what exactly is an attribute, we have discussed in the ER model, right? So, what is attribute? If you remember, attribute is nothing but some of the key properties or characteristics that describe an entity, right? Okay, and what is an entity? As we told you, and I'm repeating that entity is nothing but some kind of physical or conceptual thing, right? Like we have given an example of student, right? So now this student, if it is an entity, you will be having certain properties of characteristic in order which will actually describe about the student, right? So that particular characteristic or property will become nothing but an attribute. So if I take a student, then its name will be one of its attribute, okay, because the name it will characterize, right? Okay, then registration ID, right? It will have an unique registration ID of a students when you join. Okay, so similarly the date of birth, okay, will be describing his when he has taken the father's name, okay, address. So these under certain there will be maybe more other attributes, okay, it depends on. I just given a few example here. So student is one of the entity, and name, registration ID, date of birth, father's name, address, these are nothing but an attribute. And what is an attribute? It is nothing but the properties or the characteristics that help us in order to describe the entity. And here the entity that we have taken is the student, and the name, registration ID, date of birth, father's name, and address are its attributes. Okay, so now attribute can take a set of possible values, okay, and that set of possible values which an attribute can take, it is called as nothing but the domain of the attribute. Okay, so typically this is one of the most important question that is asked during the interview. What do you understand by an attribute, and tell me about the domain of an attribute. So when you say domain of an attribute, you have to mention the set of possible values of that particular attribute. Then we call it as a domain. Okay. So for example, if I say marital status, okay, marital status is one of the attribute, then it will be having four values. Okay. So these four values are I am a single, I'm not married, right? Then married, divorce, and windows. So these we don't. Okay, and then these four values are nothing but the domains. So all the set of possible value. What are the set of possible value for marital status? Single, married, divorced, and widowed. Okay. Similarly, another example we can give is month. Okay. So if I take month, what is the possible set of possible value will be 12, because we'll be talking from January to December. So we have 12 values, okay, and January to December. So this set of 12 values, okay, from January to December is nothing but the domain of the attribute 1. Similarly, single, married, divorced, widowed, these are the four values. These four possible values are the domain of the attribute managerial status. So we understood that domain of an attribute are nothing but the set of possible values of that particular attribute. Okay, so moving ahead, now what is a key attribute? What is a key attribute? So key attribute is an attribute that helps you to uniquely identify that any every entity instance. So example, students. So we have the 60 students, right? So if I want to uniquely identify, can the name can be one of that attribute? No, because the student can have similar name, okay, right? So I cannot take that. But registration ID, everybody has his unique registration ID, then that becomes nothing but a key attribute. Similarly, we can have employee ID also. For example, a person working in an organization, right? So since my name is Bhupesh, so Bhupesh, another employee may have also the same name, it may be with the same, a surname also. So how can we distinguish? We can distinguish with the employee ID, right? Similarly, okay, right? Okay. So next, if you want to have, suppose one particular attribute may not able to distinguish, what you say, that particular, instant entity instant, then we may have to have a combination of attributes. So that combination of attribute will be called as nothing but the composite key. For example, I have an account in the bank, bank A, and I have both, savings account, and I also have a current account. Then the account number and account type can become the key. Okay, because I'm not talking about one particular type of account, because I'm talking about savings and current. Okay, so account number plus account type can becomes the key, or the composite, the key, and that can become the composite key. I just give an example for you to understand what exactly composite key, because whenever you will be walking down the line, will be designing the database itself, you will understand certain ways an entity cannot be uniquely identified by its only one particular attribute. There may require two or more attributes. For example, you are talking about billing system itself, okay, and customer ID is there. Then there will be a product ID, and if I want to know in the end of the month what amount of product that particular person has bought, then each of this transaction will be having customer ID and product ID. Okay? So product ID and customer ID itself can be a a composite attribute like that. Okay, so I hope you have understood. So key attribute also, you have another example is the student registration number for the key attribute. Okay, now there are different type of attributes. Okay, one we distinguish as simple and composite attribute. Okay, so what is simple attribute? It cannot be divided. Okay, so I have an attribute, I cannot break down into different components, then that becomes nothing but a simple attribute. But attributes which can kind of break down into smaller or sub components, then it becomes a composite attribute. For example, the age of a student. Okay, the age of a student, I cannot divide it more uh, into different components. But for example, if I take an address of a student, okay, then I can divide it into many components. I just give a three components out here, like city, state, and zip code. Okay, similarly, we have a name. Okay, that also I can divide it into a component in some aspect if it is required, like first name, middle name, and last name, right? So simple attribute are those attributes we cannot divide. Okay, but composite attribute are those attributes which can be divided, or it can be split into various components, right? Simple attribute example, age. Okay, and composite example is like address of a student. Okay, even a name if you require in a first name, middle name, and last name. Okay, so next comes is a single and multiple value attribute. Please understand, these are the very important question that is asked in the interview. So try to understand what is single value, what is multiple value, what is simple, what is composite attribute. Okay, single and multiple. Single value attribute means it will only have one value. Okay, it can only take one value, then we call it as nothing but a single value attribute. And attributes which can contain multiple values, then we call it as nothing but multi-value attributes, can take many values. For example, if I take the age of a student, it can have only one value, right? Since the age of a student is also a single value attribute and a simple attribute. Okay, but if I take skill set of a student, it can have multiple values, right? So skill of a set of a student, like he is quite good in C plus plus, Java, like that. Okay, then it called as a multi-value attribute. Another beautiful example of multiple value attribute is your mobile number. I can have a 2 3 mobile number itself, so that then if I write mobile number, then I can have 2 3 values. So that particular attribute can become, it will become as a multi-value attribute. Okay, so lastly, we have that stored and derived attribute. Okay, so stored attribute are those attributes which can be stored permanently. Okay, and which will be there in a database itself. But the derived attribute is certain attribute which can be can be derived from a stored attribute itself. Okay, so can be calculated based on the other attribute. That is what is said. So that can be calculated based on the other attribute. Example, if I say the uh, name stored attribute is in a name of an employee. So my name of an employee can be a stored attribute itself. Okay, right? Okay. Then years of service is an example of calculated attribute. For example, the years of service of an employee working in an organization. So he will have a date of joining, and suppose today is the date, right? So what I can do, based on my current date and based on my date of joining, I can easily calculate my years of service. So my current date and date of joining, two attributes. Okay, so based on that I can create the years of service. So typically derived attribute it will show you how you can represent in a ER diagram, and ER matrix doesn't come in the relation, when you talk about in a table and all, it will not come because it can be derived from other. Okay, and stored attribute are those attributes which need to be stored permanently, right? And that is something which can be used, that can be used in the application with which, what I meant to say is that this is something which will be stored in the in the database itself, and that can be used by the application. But this type of derived attributes are not actually stored in the what you say database itself. So other, based on that date of joining is a one of the attributes will be like a stored attribute. Okay, then I can take the current date from my system itself, and then I can calculate what is the years of service. So I hope you have understood what is an attribute. Okay, attributes are nothing but we are talking about the properties and characteristics. So I gave an example with students with name, registration ID, address, and all. And then we talked about the domain. Domain are nothing but the set of values of an attribute. So you have seen like in marital status we have four domain values, right? Single, married, divorce, and like we don't itself. And then also we see month that also have 12 values. So that is starting from January to 12 January to December. So we have 12 set of values. So these are nothing but the set of possible values are called as the domain of the attribute. Then you have seen simple attribute, okay, which cannot be divided on the component. Then we see composite attribute, which can be divided into components. Example we have seen like uh, age is one of the very simple attributes which cannot be divided. But if you take an address, it can be divided into various components itself. Similarly, we have single value attributes like in the age, multi-value attribute like I gave an example of the skill set of a student, or also the mobile number itself. And then we have the stored attributes, which will be stored in permanently in the database, which will be taken out when we are using in the applications and all. We will take out the values and it will be used then. And derived attributes are which will be calculated based on other attributes. Example, you have seen the years of service, where from the date of joining and the current date from where I can get from my system itself, and based on that I can calculate the years of service. So this particular attribute, stored attribute, simple, that is very very important in perspective to your placement drive. Also, whenever you go for any kind of higher studies also, right? So these type of questions are very important. Okay, please try to understand the difference between simple and try to remember with examples so that you can communicate with your interviewer whenever he or she asks you regarding what is an attribute. Okay, what is the what do you understand by domain value? The different types like simple, composite, then single valued, multiple valued, stored, and derived attribute. Okay, so I hope you have liked this particular video itself. Okay, I request all of you to please share and subscribe my video. Okay, thank you so much, and do understand this particular concept, because this is, again I'm telling you, very important in perspective to your career. Thank you so much.